Welcome to another episode of the Life Adventurous podcast. I'm Jeni Holly, your host, and I am so grateful that you are joining here with me today, whether it be on audio with the podcast or on video, because whenever I have guests, we have a video on YouTube. So you can also watch this on YouTube for your own, whatever it is you choose. So the Life Adventurous podcast is a place where I love to explore all different things related to spirituality, adventure, living your best life. I mean, there's so many different directions we could go. And I'm so excited to bring on a little bit different of a topic today. This is one that's very near and dear to my heart because if you don't know, I did spend a bit of time in my entrepreneurial journey where I was basically wanting to do the speaker thing, a speaker, author, coach. I went to all kinds of trainings and I was fully involved. If you've really been around me for a long time, you knew that I was part of the Keynote, which was a positive reality TV show concept that was led by Delatora McNeil, where we were like all competing to see who would win the title. And it was, wholesome. And so, I've done some of those things from a place, and I really came to a space where I became quite, let's just say, burnt out from some of that experience. And I know that a big part of my path and my journey is going to be speaking and sharing and getting out there from a different place. So when I met our guest today, Lauri, that I was like, whoa, okay, hold on. I knew there was a different way to do this. And I don't know, I guess I just hadn't really looked for it. And the universe brought her into my life. And so before I share more about that, let me just give you a little bit of a background on what we're going to talk about today, because we're going to talk about like getting out of we're going to talk about like getting out of, I'm laughing because the words I'm going to say I feel like are just so funny in some ways, but like getting out of, like, I talk about how I don't really like bro marketing and I just hate the bro marketing bullshit. Well, let's just say this is the bro speaking bullshit that we're stepping away from and really stepping more into a soulful way of sharing your message and getting your message out there. So Lauri is a speaker, Lauri Smith, so you have her full name. Lauri Smith is a speaker, author, and intuitive public speaking and leadership coach. She helps, and I love these words, it's so perfect for this podcast. She helps sensitive visionaries, ambitious empaths, and loving rebels to own their wacky wildness while having a serious impact. She is the CVO, Caring Visionary Officer, which when I first saw that, I was like, was it Chief Voice Officer? I was really curious. Of Voice Matters, and the author of Your Voice Matters, A Guide to Speaking Soulfully When It Counts. Her mission is to call forth more open-hearted leaders so they can do their part to change the world with authenticity, creativity, and courage. She envisions a world in which everyone shares the vibration of their soul's purpose through their voices, and together we reach global harmony. Lauri can always see the soul underneath the static, which makes her really good at motivating people to fight their inner demons and find tremendous inner power. So I am so excited to have this conversation today. And I'm welcoming Lauri to the podcast and to the video. Welcome, Lauri.
Thank you so much, Jeni.
So, I feel like really called to say this right now before we really get in, is as I was reading this, your bio and like sharing a bit, I have myself been working with Lauri. So if this is your first time listening to a podcast, welcome. You get to hear the new improved me and still a work in improvement in the way that I'm sharing and talking about messages. And also, if you've been following along, it's likely you've heard me like slow down and you've felt more of pauses and more intentionality in when I'm talking. And so Lauri and I have personally worked together. So I am still a work in progress in this journey. So I wanted to share that. And I'm so excited that she's here. So let me just pause for a second and welcome you and give you a chance to share your voice.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm not really sure what to say. I can launch into my story of how I started doing what I'm doing today, if that's kind of the direction you want to go.
Yeah, usually one of the first questions I like to ask is, really like tell us a little bit more about who you are. So cool. I read the bio. You're amazing. You make this transformative change. That's amazing. I want to hear a little bit more about like who you are. What do you like to do? And sure, you can weave some of that in because I'm sure it's a big part of it. But yeah, just like give us like the raw, unedited version.
The raw, unedited version. I am an empath. And sometimes that in my past meant some of my journey with speaking was to step up to speak and like cry
Mm,
uncontrollably and move through the tears in order to get my voice out into the world.
mm,
I have a background in theater. My mother discovered me pretending to be Cindy Brady in the backyard when I was 7 years old and immediately took me to an acting class. And I did that for a very long time, and I still act. And I often tell people that I've spent my life sorting out the gems from the world of theater, from the crap, the disempowering stuff,
mm-hmm,
and the things that speakers don't need to go anywhere near. And I really had huge breakthroughs in my late 20s, early 30s when I was working at a place called the Sideways Studio in San Francisco. And at that point, I was like, armored up and protected. And I had these masks coming from corporate America, like the I'm fine mask with lots and lots of jaw tension. And I remember doing a scene once in that class where I started crying during the scene, and
mm,
everybody else in class was really impressed. And Richard whipped his glasses off and he looked a little dumbfounded. And he mentioned that my sensitivity is a huge gift at that time, in particular, as an actor, but I wasn't leading with it.
mm,
I was hiding behind and leading with my mind. And he said both are a really powerful combination for an actor, but you're protecting yourself.
mm,
You're leading with the one that feels safe when it's the combination that makes you you and makes you really unique. And I started owning my sensitivity first as an actor, and then eventually realized in speaking, it's actually a superpower because I can feel what's going on for people in the room, which makes them feel heard even when I'm the one speaking.
mm-hmm.
And some more unedited stuff because I got all passionate there. Um, I love pale pink, like paler than our markers,
Uh-huh.
which as a tomboy was like a huge dirty little secret. And even had when I was going to move in with my now husband, I had this moment with a friend where I started ranting and raving about the pink tiles in the bathroom
Uh-huh.
during I showed up for a singing lesson with her because we were trading speaking for singing. And I remember standing in her space and just like going off on how it was impossible to match pink tiles. And she just looked at me and went, "This is so not about the tiles." And then she was like, "There are a gazillion ways to match the color pink in a bathroom. This is about something else." And now, like, I wear pale pink sweaters and pants and shoes. I love the pink tiles in the bathroom. If we ever move anywhere else, I'm probably going to put pink tiles, super, super pale pink. Uh, oh, and I love Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Ooh, okay. That's like a blast. Like I haven't watched those shows in such a long time. Like I'm like is that also the same era as Charmed?
I think it's around the same era, like
Okay.
somewhere in the 90s.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, because I watched probably more Charmed than Buffy, but I did watch Buffy, but I
Yeah, I
don't really
watched.
remember it right now.
Oh man, I could just derail the whole podcast. It's like a leadership thing. There's Buffy, she's the hero
Oh,
type.
oh,
And I've done branding through archetypes, and it
okay.
explains why I used to say, like, I'm kind of a Buffy, but really I'm kind of a combination of Buffy and Willow.
Okay.
And I did my archetypes, and I'm a hero magician or hero alchemist.
Hmm.
Actually, alchemist is first, so I'm now like more Willow than Buffy. Um, but everything you need to know about leadership is in the show Buffy.
All right. That's awesome. It's your next keynote presentation.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, so what I'm curious about is, so you spent time in acting classes and acting, and you even mentioned singing, which I didn't realize or I didn't remember if you had told me. Is why, like, do you still do those things, and why switch more into speaking and helping, soulful visionaries find their voice?
Yeah. I still act. The singing was to express myself. My mother passed away in 2015.
Mhm.
And about 6 months after she passed away, I was teaching a theater class, and I brought in a play that I had written for them to do cold readings. So they're not supposed to have ever seen the script. And I just had this intuitive, okay, I'll use my script because there's no way they could have seen it. So everybody will be on a level playing field. And it was a play called Risk Factor. It was all about love. And I was single at that point. And I was sitting there very much like in the awareness zone, feeling myself kind of heat and thaw from the inside out while holding this, like, I am the teacher right now. And I'm having like some kind of burning, fiery, coming back to life awakening, and came away from that and went, my theme for 2016 was Carpe Diem. And I was like, I hadn't acted in 5 years. And that
Mm.
was an accident. It wasn't like I made an empowered choice to take a break. So I started speed dating, and I went and did an audition. And I also reached out to my friend who was a singing instructor and said, I just have this intuitive urge to like sing as part of this Carpe Diem come back to life thing. So we traded performance coaching for singing. So I don't do it regularly like I was when I was meeting with her every
Mhm.
2 weeks. And I still remember everything we did. And I've had to sing a couple of times in plays, not musicals, but just like characters are like singing, humming to themselves on stage, or singing the French national anthem, or things like that.
Okay.
Acting, I do still do
Mhm.
because I love it. I also, it works really well with my speaking because it's like it teaches me or reminds me of things that I'm doing myself as a speaker and with others as speakers.
So why then, working with, empaths and visionary souls, why did you want to then move from speaking and singing and acting into this role?
Yeah, it took a while for it to crystallize. And I remember a moment when I was teaching theater, ooh, 12, somewhere. I had already kind of started my business, but it was very much like I'm life coaching and then I'm also an acting teacher.
Mhm.
And I had had a best of times, worst of times with students one year. And then the next year, I started owning really my way of teaching instead of trying to imitate others. And I stumbled on to a coaching program. And then I got a phone call that the budget had been slashed, and I was going to be teaching a class that was twice as big because it was 2 years all at the same time.
Mm.
Everyone who had been in the stormy best of times, worst of times the year before, and the newbies coming in. And from day one, I started out and I really owned my intuitive way of teaching. And by the end of that quarter, I was watching all of the students, some of whom had flat out said they hated my class the year before.
Mhm.
And there was like a mean girls environment going on. A year later, I was watching them all warming up. They hadn't even started acting yet. They were just like moving and making sound. And I was sitting in the corner with tears in my eyes.
Mm.
And I had the thought, this is so amazing. I want more. And then the next thought was, this shouldn't just be for actors anymore. And pretty quickly and over the course of time, it became more and more fine tuned. I started out saying that I worked with emerging leaders. And then over the course of many years, I realized there were reluctant leaders. Some of them saw themselves as leaders and some of them didn't. And then, probably about a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months ago, the sensitive, visionary, ambitious empath, and loving rebels, like that just came in like a download. And I was like, I know I'm an empath. And I know a lot of my clients are empaths, but empath is not a word that everyone knows. So
Mhm.
having like three ways of saying, if you've got this like seemingly like visionary and sensitive, ambitious and empath, it's like, it's a really kind of unique combination
Mhm.
in our world. And all three of those things would describe me. And
Mhm.
when I looked back over the course of 15 years, I was like, yep, the clients where it was an absolutely magical fit fall into that category.
Mhm. So, pulling back into when I was like starting the podcast and I was sharing a bit about my journey with some of the like bro marketing and then the bro speaking. I'd love to just dive into this. And I right now I don't really fully know a question to ask, but I would love to just have a conversation around this because like I said, that was one of the things that really drew me to you and having a conversation because coming from the training that I had, and I think, how about this? I'll just share a bit and then you can speak in and fill and we'll just go. Cause I feel like I had a great experience in so many ways. But at the same time, where I was at in my journey, some of the things that I was learning really, like, I don't know, I felt like I had to like fit a mold and I didn't know any better. And so, like, I tried to fit the mold and realized that the mold wasn't really for me. And also wanted to be I wanted to be a sage on the stage, even though I knew that era had passed. Like, my ego really craved being an expert and being out there and being seen and heard. And at the same time, I was in my 20s and I even turned 30 during one of the National Speakers Association meetings that I flew to San Diego for. And there are so many things that crushed me there where I was in tears so many times because so many people were talking about like how they made it and they were so wonderful and amazing. And I just felt like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Like I have this dream, but everybody keeps telling me I'm just this little girl who doesn't know what she's doing, whether they said it indirectly or not. So it's just, I've seen a lot from like the keynote and from the glitz and glamour and from the you're somebody because you have these awards and I don't know, and I just didn't realize there was another way of doing. Let me say this: I knew there was another way of doing it. I just hadn't come into it.
Yeah. I I coined a phrase, again, channeling something when I was about to shoot a live.
Uh huh.
It was called Goodbye Industrial Speaking.
That's the name
And
you used. I forgot what it was that you called it. Okay.
yeah, and I've been thinking about that and thinking that feels like I hit on something with the intuitive blurt. A lot of the speaker training programs out there have been around for a really long time. They've been around since the industrial age, where the leaders that they were trying to train in those bro speaking places
Mm-hmm.
were managers on factory floors where they needed them all to sound the same, look the same, represent just like, the cogs that they're putting in the cars in the factory. And there is some good stuff over there, some structures and things that work for some people. What's missing is that it's like you want to build your one of a kind car of you, not a Ford Fiesta
Mm-hmm.
version. So it rubs a lot of my clients. It's like it never feels aligned because it can't ever fully feel aligned. And the way that those other programs are run most of the time is that in the training that you're getting, it's like someone presents a one size fits all idea and then tells you to go out and do it. There's no one who's watching you and working with you the way athletic coaches and acting coaches work with people. They don't
Mm-hmm.
just show a video of Steph Curry shooting and tell everybody who's 10 years old playing basketball to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody watches and says, hey, there are some things in Steph Curry's form that you
Mm-hmm.
might want to look at. And here's where you're off, or your shoulder joint is different than Steph's, so you need to make a little adjustment. And for speakers, I feel like I'm one of the people who was born in this era because we're not in the industrial era
Mm-hmm.
anymore. Every single person is charismatic in their own unique way, just like all of our fingerprints are different.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to think of words like recipes. Like there might be some recipes that you learned in your past that work for you exactly as they were given to you. There might be some recipes where you go, I'm going to throw out 90% of that recipe, but 10% of that one works for me. And I even feel like some of the things that I give, they're my recipes. And I'm like, this is a starting point for you to work from, particularly when it comes to content. It's like, I've got a
Mm-hmm.
recipe. Let's start there. And then you can adjust it and put in more chocolate chips if that's what works for you.
Earlier today, I recorded another podcast episode, and actually her episode came out a few before this, and I was telling her, I was like, oh, I'm so excited because I'm speaking to Lauri and we're talking about soulful speaking. And she's an intuitive as well. And she was like, oh my God, this sounds so amazing. It sounds like what she's doing is helping people move from speaking from the head down into speaking from the heart and the
Yeah.
soul. And in what you were just sharing, do you feel that some of those industrial speaking formats, I don't know, whatever the word is, like those ways are more from the head? Is that what you're like? Do you see the?
I do. Or I do feel like they're way more from the head because they're rigid and one size fits all, and they are a lot about content. In my little, so I went to some of those places, part for
Mm-hmm.
myself and part looking for clients. um, and I saw myself exclusively as the presence person in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going looking for, give me the structure, give me the content. um, because it's so rigid and structure based, and we're talking about the content, not the actual standing on stage and doing the delivery, which requires your body. Most speakers who come from there, it's very heady,
Mm-hmm.
disconnected, no awareness of the body, the heart, the energy. Some speakers who come from there happen to maintain that. It's like a crapshoot because
Mm-hmm.
no one, it's like having theater where you only have the writers in the room and like you're getting an AI to show up and try to perform it or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
In theater, there's a writer and then there's an actor who embodies it and brings it to life. And then there's also a director. And particularly when I started 15 years ago, I was like, everybody's just talking about what people are going to say.
Mm-hmm.
Who's helping them with how they get up and do it and what their body is doing? And if your body is betraying you, why is your body betraying you? And the one of the number one shifts, particularly when I work in groups, is someone will speak and I'll coach them, giving them individual attention. And people will go, I understood you the first time. And they'll point to their head for those of you just listening to audio. And then the second time they'll say something like, I got you.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll point to their heart or their gut
Mm-hmm.
or both. And they don't always realize they're doing it. And then I'll say, I'm just going to point out that they were saying they understood you and pointed to their head. And the second time they felt you in their heart and in their body. And that is because you were coming from your heart and you were in your body.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like that's almost shift number one. And then eventually, from being able to be in your body and heart connected to the audience, then it can become more like an experience of channeling where
Mm-hmm.
you're in front of 5,000 people. And some of the ways that things are coming out of your mouth are slightly different than they ever have been before, because your intuition is really firing and you're picking up on what's in the space, what that audience needs on that day in
Mm-hmm.
order to really feel and stay with you and your magic and your message.
There's a couple reflections that are coming up, and this is all based on my experience. Like, I'm not an expert in the NSA world, or nor can I even really speak to what may be present to other people with their perceptions. So as I was hearing you talk, there's something that really stands out to me, because in all the training I went to, is I feel like some of the things I went to were a little bit more comprehensive than maybe some of the more like hardcore industrial ways of doing it. I still don't feel like they offered what you're talking about, of really coming into the body. Now, I say all that because when you talk about like where to stand and how to deliver and whatnot, I feel like there was a quite a bit of emphasis of what I was exposed to for a keynote speaker, because the keynote speaker is delivering a story sometimes 50, 100 times. And I would think that that would be more like an acting type of role, where you're honing in on your story and you're to make the most impact. Your voice goes up here and then you pause this way and you stand over here on the stage. Like, I remember sitting in NSA trainings where someone delivered their keynote that was based on this story, because they were like a fire, like some kind of a jet fighter, the first woman. Like, her story is amazing. She's an excellent keynote speaker from what I was, like, and then she would do her keynote and then she would break it down. Okay, I did this here and I stood here and I moved over here. So I feel like there's just different ways of speaking, where there's the keynote and then there's breakouts and then there's seminars and then there's full day Tony Robbins type stuff. Like, there's so many different styles. Don't
Yeah.
specifically have a question, but I'm just sharing to see what comes up as you
Yeah.
get that.
Yeah. You made me flash on a couple of different memories and thoughts. Even in theater, there are directors who are more outside in directors. And I'm more of an actor's director when I direct. And this is a lot of what I'm like as a speaking coach. It's more of an inside out.
Mm.
So in my bio, it said, I see the soul underneath the static. I'll go backwards in time or I'll bounce all around. I directed a play, let's say 5 to 7 years ago, at the same time as a colleague was directing a play. And some of the students went to see both of them and came back and said, we could tell who directed it, even if we didn't know. In the other play, it was very crafted. The direction was great, like where you're asking the actors to move on the stage in order to help tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
And yet in your version, the actors seemed vibrant and alive from head to toe.
Mm-hmm.
And my process isn't to show up to rehearsal and have all the blocking predetermined. If you're really far in the outside in direction, the directors literally show up and they've already blocked the show.
Mm-hmm.
So they just tell the actors where to move on what lines, and the actors spend forever, some of them, trying to inhabit that and make it feel organic and feel alive.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'll flash back in time. I remember a director when I was 19 years old in undergrad, a movement instructor, saying she can always tell when it was the director's idea for someone to move somewhere, because they never fully look alive doing it. In my way of working, I show up and I'm like, okay, let's run the scene on its feet and see what happens. And then
Mm-hmm.
when something happens that feels like it is alive for the actors and it tells the story, I go, pause, we're going to keep that one. So do it again to get that version into your bodies. And that's very much how I work with speakers.
Mm-hmm.
Let's get you alive. And then it's like, to me, it just feels easier. 90% of the work is done when the actors or the speakers are vibrant and alive from head to
Mm-hmm.
toe and coming from their intuition. And then there's like 10% of some fine tuning shaping where I go, let's keep this version that you just did. Instead of, I want you to walk over here on this because that means blah, 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 blah to the audience.
Mm-hmm.
It never worked for me. Or when I was younger, I was one of those people who couldn't inhabit the outside in ideas from directors.
Mm-hmm.
I have learned to do that. Now I'm 51 years old. When I was 25, I was not very good at that. Like I even used to like inside be rolling my eyes when they would go, "Can you laugh on that line?" And then like in my 30s at one point someone who knew me, a director was like, "I know you hate this, but can you just try laughing?" And I said, "Absolutely." And I tried it and something unlocked.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, I've shifted a little. Like, I'm aware we're in rehearsals. If it doesn't work, when I give your outside in direction my all, we can say, okay, that didn't work. Let's try another way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, one thing I'm feeling really called to have you define here is, yes, like how my questions have been, and based on like my training from National Speakers Association and wanting to speak, I would love for you to define, because I feel like it has multiple entry points. Define speaker. What does speaker mean with the work that you do? Because I feel like what I'm talking about is one dimension of it, and there's other aspects of people that may feel like, well, I don't want to do that, yet they would be a perfect like
Yeah.
person to step into
Yeah.
this.
That's a great question. Speaker is probably somebody who gives a speech, gives a talk, does podcasts, maybe leads breakouts, maybe facilitates all day events. I'm going to go over to acting again. There are actors who are leading men or women who kind of play one type of character. There are comedians. There are actors who mostly do comedy. There are actors on sitcoms. There are actors in movies. There are stage actors. There are film actors. There are television and commercial actors. So there's a huge amount of variety in both.
Mm-hmm.
My mind wants to say the word messenger right now. I think there's an old guard of speakers where it's more about entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are messengers. And then there are transformative speakers. I'm not so interested in the speakers that are speaking for entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
Purely. It doesn't mean you won't give a talk that's entertaining. I was this way as an actor also. I like the really juicy roles and the juicy plays where people leave and they're talking about the production that they just saw at least for a couple hours, if not weeks,
Mm-hmm.
because it touched on something that's a human truth, not just let's entertain. Although, right after COVID, all we in the theater wanted to do was like, let's get back in and entertain people because that is what is transformational right now.
Mm-hmm.
speakers that are messengers or transformative speakers are tapping into things about humanity. That's different. So I hope that helps.
Well, because what I'm thinking is I'm like, okay, I know there are people who are listening to this, who have or watching, who have a story or
Mm-hmm.
have this like calling to share their message, to share. And I'm just like, for me, all of them are kind of coming together because traditionally, when we say certain words, they elicit certain ideas.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't want to be a speaker.
Yeah.
And they may not want to be a speaker, but at the same time, if you're sitting on a podcast like this, sharing your message on video, or you're doing videos for social media or whatever it may be,
Yeah.
I would say that that qualifies as speaking. And it's more about, you know, that what you're saying, like someone who has a message that they want to make an impact.
Yeah.
And my my brain when we first connected was like, oh, I knew there was a different way to do the speaking that I chased in the past. It wasn't really on my radar to fully get back in because I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't like, oh, I want to get back speaking again. Like, I'm kind of interested, but like, I don't know. I just feel like I was so burnt from so many of those things, burnt out and burnt. Not because people, as in case one of them are listening or watching, it's not because the people burnt me. It's just that wasn't my path. And it just
Mm-hmm.
burnt me like so much. And so, in the work that we've done together in this short period of time, I've already like can see the massive improvements and I haven't even spoke like trying to get a speaking thing or whatever. I haven't done that, but I'm obviously sharing a message in so many other ways, talking to people. Hello, just
Yeah.
in conversations, slowing
Yeah.
down more. Like there are so many impacts on this work. But of
Yeah.
course, I feel like everybody needs this, but I also know like,
Yeah.
no.
Well, I mean, when I had that moment in the theater
Uh-huh.
and I was like, this shouldn't just be for actors anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I think I remember feeling like the whole planet deserves this.
Yeah.
And then some wise people were like, okay, but you can't work with the whole planet. And marketing to the whole planet doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So I got called to leaders or visionaries. And one thing I will say, and I'm going to say it this time, if you are a sensitive visionary, an ambitious empath, or a loving rebel, we need to have have or develop 3 traits that not everyone does and not everyone needs to. We need to have a vision or a dream of how we want the world or our world to be different in some way. We need to be able to navigate creatively from the present that we're in toward making that vision or that dream real. And the third thing is we need to be able to communicate that dream in a way that inspires others and calls them forth to join us on the journey to making it real.
Mm-hmm.
So if you see yourself as a rebel, that's why sometimes people are like, do you work exclusively with corporate? Do you work exclusively with soulpreneurs? Not exclusively. Many of my clients are small business owners, soulpreneurs. What all of my clients have in common is they're on some kind of a mission. So some of them are in corporate and they feel like the loving rebel. There's like, they want to shake up the system from within. And they don't look like, oh, I'm just going to collect my paycheck. It's like you can feel that there's a mission there. At this time in their life, they're changing it from within a corporate system.
Mm-hmm.
All loving rebel, ambitious empath, if you're wanting to create some change in the world, you need to be able to share your message, share your magic, communicate from a heart-centered, inspiration-centered place. Otherwise, you can't get as much done during your lifetime.
Yeah.
So you need to speak.
Yeah.
And some of that speaking is like, I'm sitting around a boardroom table with 12 other people trying to get them to understand my radical idea,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm seeing a thing that no one else in the room has grokked yet. So you have to say it and say it again and say it again until eventually the room goes, oh, because you're creating a paradigm shift with the things that you're seeing and saying.
Yeah. Yeah, and too, even in that environment, if we're speaking head to head to match the current energy, like what you're talking about, the paradigm shift, like the leader, the impact, something else has got to change. And it's not like you're going to announce like, I'm going to speak from the soul to change you. It's not like you're just speaking differently. Because I know one of the big things that I learned and I'm still noticing and practicing is when I'm speaking more from the throat and there's like a force there. And I think I'm even borderline on it right now because I can feel it a bit.
Mm-hmm.
There's this breathing that carry you. Already there's a shift there, like that
Mm-hmm.
carry you. And
Mm-hmm.
for me too, coming out of that performative nature of I'm performing because I want the approval or I want people to respect what I'm saying, it's like there's a different way to get there.
Yeah. And sometimes the words that you say will also shift when you make that body, breath, energy shift.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they don't. So it's not as if the minds over there that need to hear you with their mind can't still hear it, but something else is happening that they may not be aware of, but it's impacting them differently. It's like
Mm-hmm.
subconsciously they're more open to your ideas. There are times where clients and me say something and the room kind of or like they're just, it's like I'm speaking a different language, but it stays with the people who listened. And then they come back and say, I was thinking about that thing that you said in the meeting, because it hits them differently. And in speakers, it's speakers, leaders, visionaries, ambitious, all those people.
Mm-hmm.
It's trickier because it's like the words might also shift when you drop into your body in a different way. In theater, it can be more clear because it's like you gave me a script. I'm playing a doctor in a concentration camp. I have the exact same words. But when I really get it, it feels different, even though it's the exact same words.
Mm-hmm.
I'm embodying it differently. I'm breathing life into it differently. I'm holding the energy of the space differently.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I think there's two things that I'm feeling like will help to just finalize this chat with you. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing is I want to talk a little bit about how to work with you and share a bit about my experience and kind of talk about that a little bit more and what you have coming.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing, like to kind of close it off, is, and it doesn't have to be this one, it could be whatever one you feel like is best. But I just feel like for me, the whole feeling the difference and speaking more from the throat versus letting the breath go. And I know like what you do with the S's and the Z's, I don't know if that's something that we do to close it off or if there's something else that would be really beneficial just to help people like go, oh, holy crap, there's a whole nother way of doing this, and just experiencing that
Mm-hmm.
would be good. So that's what I'm thinking. I gave you some like a little bit of a heads up.
Okay.
So one thing I was going to say, as far as like working with you, you know, it's interesting to me with like how online we are. Even with me, I still get people being like, well, I'm not where you are. I don't think of all my Akashic record readings, like any of them besides my husband have been in person. So saying that, we've worked, as I've been a nomad, all virtually on Zoom. which I know is
Mm-hmm.
one of the aspects, but like, how do you actually make these impacts? Because any of the other speaking stuff I went to before, I was in person. I was like physically at these seminars and physically at these events. Like, what does that look like for you?
Yeah. I like to say I've been working on Zoom since before it was popular, which was really nice in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
I used to have in my contracts that people needed to try working with me on Zoom twice. Like I did some work in person and I requested that everybody try in person twice and Zoom twice. And really, I had been working with people since somewhere in the 20 teens, more online than in person, because the clients, the ambitious empaths, loving rebels, sensitive visionaries, were all over the world. So we did it that way. So now I'm bringing back some in person. I work with some people exclusively on Zoom, and I'm going to start to bring back some in person events so that we can do really juicy things in person. I love working in groups, um, a different kind of group than the bro speaking, modeled modeled after theater master classes.
Mm-hmm.
So I just recently, as you know, created something called the Speakers Studio, modeled in some ways after the Actors Studio. And I chose the name because of that. I grew up watching inside the Actors Studio. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I also had huge breakthroughs and got catapulted to the me that I am now in the Sideways Studio in San Francisco. Acting master classes are small, intimate groups, enough so that your body is processing that there is a group rather than just working with someone one on one, which then makes the leap to speaking in front of whatever size crowd, up to tens of thousands, easier to do in that vibrant, alive, open hearted way.
Mm-hmm.
And you also do some learning and get some ahas from watching other people in the group go through similar things to what you are going through. Um, we're raised in a world that is asking us to suppress our emotions, to suppress our unique life force, and then to kind of put on the masks of how
Mm-hmm.
we think the world wants us to be. Like, I need to look smart. I need to be happy. I need to be an extrovert. So I have to have a very extroverted energy. This is not that. This is the place to take off all those masks and figure out how to show up as us and have the impact that only we can have.
Mm-hmm. And so you're going to be doing the speaker studio both in person and online, you were saying?
Yeah, the full studio has a combination where we meet on a regular basis
Mm-hmm.
to practice what we're learning on on Zoom in small groups, 9 people or less in my groups per circle. And then there will be mini retreat things where we come together in person. And I'm flirting with the idea of also allowing people to Zoom in. And I'm not exactly sure how that will be handled to have the like, now you get the time to play with the basketball part.
Mm-hmm.
So some mini retreats where we all come together physically in the same space and play together in the same space. And part of it is because there are some things that are juicier that way, but we don't need to do it all the time, every single week that way. And speaking is happening in person now. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a good idea. There's a lot happening on Zoom, and there are a lot of speaking opportunities coming up for people that require going back in person. And if you are a sensitive visionary, an ambitious empath, or a loving rebel, your system, body, heart, energy, soul is going to experience that in a radically different way, just like film acting is radically different from stage
Mm-hmm.
acting. So
Mhm.
it's having the opportunity to practice all the things.
Yeah, it's so true. As you say that, it reminds me of one of the things that you taught me because we worked one on one together for such a short period of time, 2 months. It was a little less than 2 months, about 2 months, right? And so we
Yeah.
worked together, and that dramatically changed. And then I've started to be involved in some of the group things, and they're just as impactful. Of course, when you have the one on one, you get all the time and all the energy and everything, and it can move things quicker. And the group stuff, one of the things that continues to stick out with me and speaks to that difference you're talking about is, like, you always talk about hugging the room, and hugging the room in person, because I haven't done in person speaking in a long time, besides
Mm-hmm.
chatting at a coffee shop with somebody, right? And Zoom speaking are quite different, because
Yeah.
all I have to focus on here is make sure I'm not too wiggly in my chair and I can stand here and ground myself, but also remembering you talk about the whole 2D, like this is a 2D platform. You have to speak like through the screen, like or
Yeah.
more. So yes, they are definitely different.
Yeah.
Um, and for us to remember that, let's just say that for us to remember that.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it time to do
Yes.
something so they can feel it? So
Yeah.
I don't know exactly where this is going to go, but it's one of my favorite ways to do it because it also brings in my love of chocolate
Mm.
and your love of whatever treats you like. So we're both going to do it. And anybody listening to this or watching this later, I invite you to try it in your body.
Is it okay if they're driving, or do they need to maybe?
Yes, at
Okay.
least this first part should be easy. So exhale all of your air. We're going to exhale all of our air, and then we're going to say our favorite dessert and feel how that
Mm.
is.
Oh,
Dark chocolate.
ice cream.
That was, um, as Jeni mentioned earlier, kind of like coming from the throat
Mm-hmm.
rather than having the breath go through the whole body. Now we're going to try a slightly different one. We're going to take a really shallow breath. Dark chocolate.
Ice cream.
Now we're actually going to inhale and fill our body up like filling a gas tank before a road trip. Dark chocolate.
Ice cream. I just feel it feels so much easier to do that. Like, I feel so constricted in the other two ways. Like, I feel like I'm just doing the task and I
Yeah.
can't help myself, but like, mm.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the reason we're going through these for people listening is that I mentioned it's like we've been raised to speak from a voice of suppression.
Mm-hmm.
People have said, don't be too big, don't be too much, don't take up too much space, don't be too emotional. And the way we don't be too all those things, especially emotional, is we suppress our breathing, dark chocolate, and use some of the same muscles that are suppressing to try to get the voice to cross a space.
Yeah. And too, like, in the experience of that, for me, even though I've done versions of this with you, like here in the moment, the thing is like, it, you're exactly right about the suppression, of course. I'm not saying you wouldn't have been, but like
Mm-hmm.
how I just felt like, oh, I'm watching, she's making me do this. I don't know, whatever stupid stuff's going on in our heads that's not, like you're like, oh, what am I doing? And then with
Mm-hmm.
that one, there is a level of vulnerability, because I knew, I was like, oh, I feel where this is going. And I really just want to be like, ice cream. And I want to move, but there's vulnerability to showing up in a different way
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's helpful to do like this stuff that we're doing with the body and the breath. We're mostly focused on breath, and yet when we breathe, something happens with the body and something happens energetically as well. If we set an intention for what we want for the audience,
Mm-hmm.
that gets us out of like, oh my God, they're going to watch me be all vulnerable when I'm saying dark chocolate.
All sensual. Right. Right.
So it's still vulnerable, and it becomes sort of vulnerable with a point to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the course of whatever message we're delivering, the images that come out of us whether it's dark chocolate, ice cream, a CFO rattling off numbers in an earnings call, somebody talking about, how many people marched on Washington
Mhm.
when Martin Luther King Jr. gave his speech. Those are all images.
Mhm.
Trees, nature are images. So if we've set an intention, and then we start doing this more vulnerable way of speaking where we can feel the dark chocolate or feel the wind in the trees as we're talking about them. And then we invite the audience to come along for the ride with us.
Mhm.
Then it still feels vulnerable, but vulnerable with a point, and vulnerable focused on the transformation of the people in the room really works for those change makers, rebels, ambitious empaths, and sensitive visionaries.
Mhm.
It might not work for somebody who just wants to entertain. And I'm okay with that. They can go hire an entertainment focused speaking coach and be in full alignment with them.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, I think for me, this conversation is to help create awareness of another way of doing things. And so my intention of this conversation is for those who are like resonating, or those who are really like feel something inside, right? Their intuition is talking to them, or they're like, wow, and like something's pinging, right? Like, ooh, like my invitation with this podcast is to just follow that, whether it's hiring Lauri now, or just is not the greatest word, or joining her email list, or whatever it is, to be in this conversation, to realize that there is a more impactful, like powerful way for you to show up and still be yourself, and
Yeah.
not have to fit a mold or feel like you have to fit a mold. The like, oh, you have to do keynotes this way, or you have to do something that way, just because you've seen others do it that way who are successful. Just because Tony Robbins speaks a certain way doesn't mean that's the way you have to speak. And I think sometimes we do that because we see success and think that our success has to come the same way. Like, what if you're able to, how does Lauri say it, own your wacky wildness, whatever that is, where you can just feel so comfortable in who you are. And this work with Lauri has impacted me. Like, I've shared a bit, it's impacted me in ways that I didn't really even realize. To be able to make that impact, like one of the very first things we worked on was when I'm sharing channeled messages. And before, I would kind of like, some of the ones I posted early on, I'm like, because I was like, oh, I got to get through it fast because people are busy, and I don't know, like I got to say it quick, and I was feeling a ways about it, and I had one of those masks on.
Mm-hmm.
And didn't realize, just like the ice cream or the dark chocolate, like didn't realize that I could have a sensuality about that experience. Because really, ultimately, a channeled message is not about me. It's about the receiver of the message.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Beautiful.
Is there anything that we haven't covered, or that you would like to add, or that you feel like is a good, anything else that you want to share?
I had a bunch of thoughts come in and then they've all left. mm. Mm. To really get a little bit what we're talking about with the, like, you can do it your way, imagine a couple of different things. One of my favorites is imagine Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. And now imagine that instead of being shared by Martin Luther King Jr., it's being shared by Richard Nixon. Um, or imagine it's being shared by me, or Jeni, or Tony Robbins. Nixon is kind of the least able to deliver that message with any kind of power. The rest of us are all, I like to think, pretty charismatic. Jeni is very charismatic. If she got up and gave the I Have a Dream speech, it would be very different than how Martin Luther King Jr. did it.
Mm-hmm.
So by giving you a bunch of different people, Barack Obama, um, Ronald Reagan, a
Mm-hmm.
former actor who then became a speaker, very different types of charisma, very different types. So when I say there's 7.9 billion different, I mean you too, listener.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. So I've had scrolling here on YouTube, like how people can connect with you, but from an audio perspective, where would be the best place? Like, where do you like to connect with people, or where do you want them to go for more?
Yeah, my website is the best place to find more. Uh, www.voice-matters.com. The speaker studio is there. There are an events if you go to voicematters.com/speakers-studio. There's an events page if you want to come. August 30th, I have an authentic speaking play shop. If you want to come check out this way of working in a group, you can book a one-on-one. And if you love all the socials, scroll to the bottom of the page, and I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn right now.
And come join me. I'm gonna be in speaker studio as well. So come
Yeah.
join me. I'd love to be there alongside of you and help cheering you on as we really step into our power even more and get our messages out there. And only if you feel called. Only if you feel called. No forcing. Just because you love me and you want to hang out with me, don't just join for that reason. Make sure it's aligned. I just want to be with Jeni. Well, you want to be with Jeni and Lauri, and you want to learn all of this stuff. So,
Yeah.
oh, that's so funny. I don't even know where that came from, but that was fun.
That's cool. That's usually how I feel. The like heart-centered way of asking is like it includes like part I want this for you, like I want
Uh-huh.
you out there listener to come join the thing, and part like it would be so cool cuz I would get to play with you.
Yeah,
And then the soul way of asking is part of what you just did. It's like the heart's like it would be so awesome. And then the soul steps in and goes if it's aligned.
yeah,
I'm inviting and I'm releasing attachment to you coming if it's aligned and if it is the time for you right now.
totally. Well, thank you, Lauri, for spending your time with us today. I'm so grateful you came on to share this amazingness with the world and invite more people into this way. I know that anytime I'm going to be talking to anyone who wants to speak or, oh, I've thought about speaking, I'm going to be sharing a link to this podcast. Like, hey, as you're looking for what aligns with you, you got to at least listen to this other way. Because,
Yeah.
you can hop into the Toastmasters and the Carnegies and whatever, and those are cool, but maybe there's another direction you may want to choose.
Yeah. Thank you.
All
Thank you so
right.
much for having me.
Of course. Bye, everyone.